My mother-in-law sabotaged my wedding because she couldn't stand losing control over her perfect son, and now she's furious I'm cutting her off for good. I always knew my mother-in-law, Denise, was a handful, but I never expected her to go this far. From the moment I met her, she made it clear that no one would ever be good enough for her perfect son, Tom. I thought I could handle it. After all, it was obvious from the beginning that Denise's whole world revolved around him. Tom always brushed off her overbearing ways, insisting she meant well, but I knew there was more to it. There always is with women like her. Tom and I met in college, and we clicked instantly. He was kind, funny, and had this way of making me feel like the most important person in the room. We moved in together a year later, and that's when I really started to see the extent of Denise's influence on his life. She would call him multiple times a day, often showing up at our apartment unannounced with bags of groceries or little surprises. At first, I found it sweet, but it didn't take long to realize she wasn't just being generous, she was marking her territory. Things escalated when Tom proposed to me. He was over the moon, and so was I. But Denise, not so much. She didn't even bother to hide her disdain. Instead of congratulating us, she plastered on a fake smile and said, "Well, I guess this is happening." From that moment on, she inserted herself into every single aspect of our wedding planning. She insisted on being involved in choosing the venue, the flowers, even the guest list. At first, I tried to be accommodating. After all, this was Tom's mom, and I didn't want to start our marriage with unnecessary drama. But Denise's behavior quickly became unbearable. She disagreed with every decision I made, constantly trying to suggest changes that aligned more with her vision of what a classy wedding should be. When I picked out my dress, a beautiful lace gown that I had fallen in love with, Denise wrinkled her nose and said, "You know, sweetheart, something more traditional would suit you better. You don't want to embarrass yourself." I was stunned. I knew she didn't like me, but the constant jabs were starting to wear me down, and things really took a turn when we chose our wedding date. We picked a Saturday in June, thinking it would be perfect for an outdoor ceremony. But Denise immediately objected, saying it was too hot and that we should pick a safer date in the fall. Tom, wanting to avoid conflict, suggested we move the date to please his mom. I refused. This was our day, not hers, and I wasn't about to let her dictate something so personal. Denise didn't take that well. She sulked, complained to anyone who would listen, and started throwing around passive-aggressive comments about how I was taking her son away. The final straw came when she cornered me at my bridal shower of all places, and told me that she didn't think I was ready to marry Tom. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "marriage is hard work. I'm just not sure you're cut out for it." I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue. This was Tom's mom. I couldn't let her ruin this for us. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger problem. The week of the wedding, things went from bad to worse. Denise started sending Tom texts about how he was making the biggest mistake of his life, and that I was just using him. He tried to ignore it, but I could tell it was eating at him. The night before the wedding, we had our rehearsal dinner, and Denise spent the entire evening glaring at me like I was the enemy. She refused to make a toast, barely spoke to me, and spent most of the night huddled with Tom, whispering God knows what in his ear. I was already on edge, but what happened next made everything explode. On the morning of the wedding, as I was getting ready with my bridesmaids, one of them came rushing into the room looking frantic. "You're not going to believe this," she said, holding up her phone. "Look at what Denise just posted on Facebook." I grabbed the phone and felt my blood run cold. Denise had posted a long, dramatic status about how she was heartbroken, that her son was making a terrible mistake, and that she had prayed for this day to never come. She went on to describe how she had tried to talk Tom out of it, but he was blinded by love and couldn't see that he was ruining his life. To make matters worse, she tagged half the family in the post, making sure everyone knew exactly how she felt. I was furious. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and Denise was doing everything she could to ruin it. I tried calling Tom, but he wasn't picking up. I could only imagine what kind of guilt trip she was laying on him. I knew I had to confront her, but part of me didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had gotten to me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. and focused on getting through the ceremony. But as I walked down the aisle, I couldn't shake the feeling that Denise was still trying to sabotage our day. She sat in the front row, arms crossed, with a sour expression on her face, refusing to make eye contact with me. When we finally exchanged vows, I could see the tension in Tom's eyes. He was torn between his love for me and his loyalty to his mother. I knew he loved me, but Denise's influence was always there, lurking in the background, waiting to cause trouble. After the ceremony, I tried to push my frustration aside and focus on enjoying our wedding day. But Denise wasn't done. As we moved to the reception, I noticed she was huddled in a corner with Tom, whispering furiously. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but Tom's expression was enough to tell me it wasn't good. I wanted to go over there and confront her, to demand she stop ruining what was supposed to be our special day, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I tried to keep a smile on my face and mingled with the guests, but every time I looked over, there she was, hovering over Tom, shooting me looks of pure disdain. It was like she was trying to keep him away from me, even on our wedding day. I felt trapped in this bizarre power struggle, with Denise doing everything she could to assert her control. Things came to a head during the speeches. My maid of honor, Sarah, had just finished giving a heartfelt toast when Denise decided to take the microphone. I hadn't planned for her to speak. Honestly, I hadn't even thought she'd want to. But before anyone could stop her, she was up there, tapping the mic and clearing her throat dramatically. "I just want to say a few words," she began, her voice tight. "First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming today. It's been an emotional journey, to say the least." I could feel my stomach tighten. This was supposed to be a celebration, but the tone of her voice was anything but celebratory. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Watching my son grow up has been the greatest joy of my life," Denise continued, glancing pointedly at me. "I've always been there for him, guiding him, supporting him, helping him make the right decisions. And today, well, I guess we're all just hoping he knows what he's doing." The room fell silent. People exchanged awkward glances, unsure of how to react. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just an awkward toast. This was a public humiliation. She was undermining our entire marriage right in front of our friends and family. "I've always wanted what's best for Tom," she went on, her voice cracking slightly. "And sometimes as a mother, you have to let go, even when you know, deep down, that things aren't what they seem." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, putting on the performance of a lifetime. I wanted to get up and rip the microphone out of her hands, but I was frozen in place. The audacity, the nerve, it was almost too much to comprehend. This was supposed to be our day, and she was turning it into her own twisted pity party. When she finally finished her speech, she stepped down from the stage, and the awkward tension in the room was palpable. Tom's face was pale, and he looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed over to him, grabbed his arm and pulled him aside, away from the guests. "What the hell was that?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice low. "She just humiliated us in front of everyone." Tom ran a hand through his hair, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him. I know. I'm so sorry. I didn't know she was going to do that." "You never know," I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "You never know what she's going to do because you never stand up to her. She's ruining everything and you just let her." Tom looked genuinely torn. "I don't know how to handle her. She's my mom. She's always been like this, and I've never been able to, I don't know, control it." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. "Tom, this isn't just about her anymore. It's about us. I can't keep doing this if she's always going to be in the middle." He nodded, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. He loved me, but Denise's influence was a force he had never been able to overcome. As much as I wanted him to stand up to her, I knew it wasn't something that would change overnight. The rest of the reception was awkward, to say the least. Denise kept her distance after her disastrous speech, but the damage was already done. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to put on a brave face while everything felt like it was falling apart. Our first dance felt forced, the smiles strained, and the celebratory atmosphere we had hoped for was completely overshadowed by Denise's toxic presence. As the night came to a close, Tom and I retreated to our suite, exhausted and emotionally drained. We didn't even get to enjoy the honeymoon suite we had booked, because all we could talk about was Denise and the chaos she had caused. I was at my wit's end, and I knew something had to change. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Denise's behavior slide anymore. If Tom wasn't going to put up boundaries, then I would. This wasn't just about me. This was about our future. And if Denise couldn't respect that, then I wasn't going to let her be a part of it. I told Tom exactly how I felt. I told him I loved him, but I couldn't live my life with his mother constantly trying to sabotage our happiness. She either respects us or she's cut off, I said firmly. I'm done playing nice. Tom looked at me, conflicted but resigned. You're right, he said quietly. It's time I stopped letting her control everything. It was a turning point. We both knew that our marriage wouldn't survive if we let Denise continue her reign of terror. We were done letting her dictate our lives. It was time to take back control. After the wedding disaster, Tom and I agreed to put some serious boundaries in place. For the first time in our relationship, Tom actually sat down with his mother and had a real conversation about her behavior. I wasn't there, but Tom told me later how it went. Denise was defensive, of course. She claimed she was only looking out for him and that she was just being honest because she didn't want him to make a mistake he'd regret. But Tom didn't back down. He told her that while he loved her, her constant interference was hurting our marriage. He explained that we needed space and that she couldn't keep trying to control every aspect of our lives. According to Tom, she looked shocked, like no one had ever spoken to her that way before. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. Denise was the kind of woman who thrived on control and manipulation. The idea that her son, her perfect little boy, would stand up to her was unfathomable. She didn't take it well. After Tom's confrontation, Denise went radio silent. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. At first, it was a relief. For the first time since I met Tom, I felt like we had some peace. We could actually breathe without her looming over our every move, but it didn't last long. 2 weeks after the wedding, Denise showed up at our door unannounced. Tom had just left for work, and I was home alone, cleaning up the remnants of the honeymoon gifts we hadn't put away yet. I opened the door, and there she was, looking haggard and desperate. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I didn't want to let her in. Every instinct in me screamed to slam the door and keep her out, but I hesitated. Maybe, just maybe, this was her attempt to make amends. So I stepped aside and let her in. She sat down on our couch, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. I stood across from her, arms crossed, waiting for whatever drama she was about to unleash. But instead of the usual condescending remarks, Denise did something I never expected. She started crying. "I know I've been difficult," she began, choking back sobs. I'm scared of losing him. He's my only child and I don't know how to let go." I was stunned. For the first time, Denise wasn't the overbearing, manipulative mother-in-law. I saw a scared, lonely woman who couldn't cope with the fact that her son was building a life that didn't revolve around her. It was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. "I'm not trying to take him away from you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you have to understand, Denise, you can't keep treating us like this. We need our own lives, our own space. We're not trying to shut you out, but your behavior is pushing us away." Denise wiped her eyes, sniffling. "I just feel so alone. I've always been there for him, and now I don't know where I fit in." I sat down beside her, feeling conflicted. "Denise, you're his mother. You'll always be important to him. But you have to respect our boundaries. You have to let him be his own person." She nodded, but I could tell the words didn't fully sink in. Denise had spent so much of her life defining herself through Tom that she didn't know who she was without him. It was sad, In a way, but it wasn't my job to fix her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'll try to be better. It sounded like a start, but I knew better than to get my hopes up. Denise was set in her ways, and real change wasn't going to come overnight. But at least she'd acknowledged in her own way that she needed to back off. For the next few weeks, things were relatively calm. Denise kept her distance, and Tom and I were finally able to enjoy being newlyweds without the constant interference. We started planning our delayed honeymoon, just the two of us, and I felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. But then, just when I thought Denise was finally starting to respect our boundaries, the phone calls started. At first they were harmless, quick check-ins to see how we were doing, or little updates about her life. But slowly they began to escalate. Denise would call Tom late at night, complaining about how lonely she was, how hard it was being by herself. She would guilt-trip him, saying things like, "I just wish I had someone to talk to. I'm all alone, you know." Tom tried to be patient, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. Every time he talked to her, he'd come back looking drained and frustrated. It was like she couldn't handle the idea of not being the center of his world anymore. And the worst part was, I could feel her resentment toward me growing. She would make snide comments about how some people were pulling Tom away from his family, how he was too busy now that he was married. It all came to a head one evening when Tom and I were having dinner at home. We were in the middle of talking about our honeymoon plans when Tom's phone rang. It was Denise again. He hesitated, glancing at me, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. "I'll just tell her I'm busy," he said, hitting decline. But not even a minute later, his phone buzzed with a text notification. Tom sighed, opening the message. His face went pale as he read it, and he handed me the phone without saying a word. Denise's message was short but packed a punch. "I hope you're happy. You've chosen her over me. Don't bother calling when she leaves you." I felt a surge of anger and hurt. This wasn't just about boundaries anymore. Denise was actively trying to sabotage our marriage. I looked at Tom, who seemed defeated, and I knew we couldn't keep living like this. "We have to do something," I said firmly. "This can't keep happening." Tom nodded, his expression hardening. "You're right. It's time to make a real change." Tom and I sat down that night and had a long, difficult conversation about what needed to happen next. For too long, Denise had been allowed to interfere in our lives, and we both knew it had to stop. Tom admitted he'd been avoiding the real issue, his inability to set firm boundaries with his mother, and he was ready to take a stand, for us and for our future. The following morning, Tom called Denise and told her we needed to meet in person. She was hesitant, but she agreed to come over that afternoon. I spent the hours leading up to her arrival feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. I knew this confrontation was necessary, but it didn't make it any less nerve-wracking. Denise was like a ticking time bomb, unpredictable and explosive, and I had no idea how she would react. When she arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. She sat down across from us, arms crossed, her face set in a scowl. It was clear she was expecting another argument, another chance to play the victim. But this time, Tom didn't let her steer the conversation. "Mom, this can't go on," Tom said, his voice calm but firm. "You've crossed too many lines, and it's affecting our marriage. We need you to respect our boundaries and let us live our lives." Denise's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually listen. But then her expression hardened and she launched into a tirade. "This is what I've been afraid of," she snapped. "You're being manipulated, Tom. I've been telling you from the start that she's not right for you, and now you're cutting me out because she says so." I wanted to jump in and defend myself, but Tom squeezed my hand, signaling for me to let him handle it. "This isn't about her, Mom. It's about us. I love you, but I can't keep choosing between you and my wife. If you can't respect our boundaries, then we're going to have to take a step back." Denise's face twisted in anger. "A step back? What does that even mean? You're just going to cut me out of your life? After everything I've done for you?" Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, I don't want to cut you out, but I need you to understand that your behavior is hurting us. This is our marriage, and you don't get to dictate how we live it." Denise looked like she'd been slapped. For a moment, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then she turned her anger toward me, her eyes blazing with resentment. "This is all your fault," she spat. "You've turned him against his own mother. I knew you were trouble from the moment I met you." I opened my mouth to respond, but Tom cut me off. "No, Mom, this isn't her fault, it's yours. You've pushed us to this point, and it's time you take responsibility for your actions." Denise's jaw dropped, and for the first time she was at a loss for words. She stared at Tom, her eyes filled with a mix of shock and hurt. But she didn't argue. She just sat there, fuming in silence. I could tell this wasn't the outcome she had expected. She had always been able to manipulate Tom with guilt and emotional blackmail, but this time, it wasn't working. After a few moments of tense silence, Denise finally stood up. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "If this is how you want it, then don't expect me to be around when she leaves you. Don't come crying to me when everything falls apart." With that, she stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Tom and I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a start. Tom had finally taken a stand, and that was more than I ever thought possible. In the weeks that followed, things were quiet. Denise kept her distance, and Tom and I started to rebuild our lives without her constant interference. It wasn't easy. There were days when Tom missed his mom, and I could see the guilt eating away at him. But every time Denise tried to reach out, it was always with the same manipulative tactics, and Tom held firm in his boundaries. Eventually, we went on our delayed honeymoon, a much-needed break from the chaos of the past few months. We spent 2 weeks in Italy, reconnecting and rediscovering why we fell in love in the first place. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly moving forward, leaving Denise's toxic influence behind. When we returned, Denise had left several voicemails for Tom, each more desperate than the last. She apologized, pleaded for forgiveness, and promised to change. But Tom knew better than to fall into her trap again. He called her back, not to cave in, but to set the record straight one final time. "Mom, I love you and I want you in my life," he said. "But if you can't respect our marriage, then we can't have a relationship. This is your last chance." Denise was quiet on the other end of the line. She knew he meant it. And for the first time, she seemed to understand that her son was no longer her little boy. He was a husband, and he was choosing his wife. I don't know what the future holds for us and Denise, but for now, I'm hopeful. Tom and I are stronger than ever, and we've learned to put each other first. We've set boundaries and we're sticking to them. It's not perfect and it's not easy, but it's a start. As for Denise, she's still figuring out how to let go. I don't know if she'll ever fully accept that Tom is his own person now, but that's not our problem to solve. We've done our part, and now it's up to her to do the rest. Our marriage may have started with a battle, but we've come out the other side stronger, ready to face whatever comes next, together.